Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the Presidential Medal of Freedom because our first two subjects both won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. It is awarded by the President and it is the highest civilian award of the United States. It recognizes those individuals who have made an especially meritorious contribution to the security or national interests of the United States, world peace, cultural or other significant public or private endeavors. It used to be a pretty big deal to get one of these, but lately they've been giving them to people like James Taylor and Barbara Streisand and Oprah. And I don't know about you, but that takes a little bit of the shine off the thing for me, but it's still a pretty big deal, I guess. The award is not limited to American citizens, and while it is a civilian award, it can also be awarded to military personnel and worn on the uniform, which leads into our first subject tonight, General John Vessey Jr., who died recently at the age of 94. General Vessey was one of the last generals to come from the World War II era, and he became the 10th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His career spanned 46 years, starting in the Minnesota National Guard's 34th Red Bull Infantry Division during World War II. As a lieutenant colonel in 1967, General Vessey received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions during the Battle of Soit Tre in Vietnam. After serving as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for President Reagan, Vessey was appointed special envoy to Vietnam on returning service members missing in action serving Presidents Bush Sr. and Clinton. For his service, he received the nation's highest civilian award, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Here is his award ceremony in 1992. The award was given to him by President George Herbert Walker Bush.
General John W. Vessey was the last four-star combat veteran of World War II to retire from active duty. A self-described mud soldier, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff never forgot the men in the field, and he returned from retirement to search for soldiers missing in action in Vietnam. His wise counsel to two presidents has helped to break an impasse with Hanoi, culminating in Vietnam's recent offer to provide all information about Americans missing in action. The United States honors General John W. Vessey, a soldier statesman who would not leave anyone behind.
General Vessey was a favorite son of Minnesota, came from Lakeland, and here he is giving an interview to Minnesota radio.
Sir, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, you set the aura, the stage for the leadership. And I'm reading again from a speech you gave at the Naval Training Center in Great Lakes, Illinois in 1983. And you said, "There are no unimportant jobs in the Navy or the Army or the Air Force or the Marines. It makes no difference what the color of a man's skin is who fights next to you, what state he came from, what religion he is, what ethnic background he is, whether he was rich or poor. What counts is what's in his head, what's in his heart, and what he can do with his hands to help the team get its job done. Your buddies depend on you. You depend on them. Learn to get along with them. Learn to make a team work." There really are no unimportant jobs in the military, are there?
No, that's certainly true. I've often used the example of the soldier or airman or marine or sailor driving the fuel truck that fuels aircraft. Sometimes we who are fortunate enough to be aviators get to fly above the dirty part of the battle, and we feel a little superior because we're above it. But in fact, if that soldier, sailor, or airman or marine didn't change the fuel filter on that fuel truck, and you wind up with dirty fuel in your airplane and your engine stops in the middle of wherever you are, it's a very bad day for you. And you realize that he or she is just as important and probably more important than you are at that particular moment. So there are no unimportant jobs in the armed forces.
General Vessey, we thank you for your service, and we cannot begin to repay the debt we owe you. We're going to move on now to our second Presidential Medal of Freedom winner, Dr. Donald Henderson, who died recently at the age of 87. Dr. Henderson was an epidemiologist, and he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2002 by President George Bush. You could make a case that Donald Henderson saved more lives than any other person in the 20th century. After getting his medical degree, he went into epidemiology. He worked for the CDC, but in the mid-1960s, he moved to the World Health Organization to become point man for the eradication of smallpox. At the time, while smallpox had been essentially eradicated from the First World, was still a virulent disease in the Third World. Smallpox had a unique place in human history. It had killed millions of people worldwide, had changed the course of monarchies, and it even changed the course of history when the Europeans brought smallpox to the New World. It had a role in wiping out a significant portion of the Native American population in North America, and it was critical to the takeover of the Aztec Empire by the Spanish and Cortez after the Battle of Tenochtitlan in 1520. The decimation of Aztecs by smallpox helped Cortez conquer the empire militarily. People had known for centuries that there was some relationship between the less virulent disease cowpox and smallpox, but it wasn't until Dr. Edward Jenner inoculated a small boy with pus from a cowpox victim in 1796 and then noticed that the boy was resistant to smallpox he tried to infect the boy with, that the first vaccine was born. By the mid-1960s, millions of people were still developing smallpox in the third world, and maybe 2 million people a year were dying from it. And Dr. Henderson, as the point man for the WHO, facilitated vaccination in hard-to-reach locales. He and his cohorts realized they couldn't vaccinate everybody, so what they did was they accomplished ring vaccination, which meant they immediately identified a patient with smallpox and vaccinated the patient's close contacts and the contacts of the close contacts. The strategy was successful, and in a little over 10 years, smallpox became the first disease ever eradicated by man. Today, the only smallpox that exists in vials, presumably held by the United States and Russian governments. Dr. Henderson later went on to become one of the foremost biosecurity experts in the United States, and early in this century he was called on to help devise a plan against a potential anthrax scare. Here's the Voice of America talking about Dr. Donald Henderson.
The 2001 anthrax scare in the United States spread fear and chaos across the country. Letters containing anthrax spores were mailed to congressional offices and media outlets, killing 5 and infecting more than a dozen others. Some congressional buildings and post offices were shut down to decontaminate. In the aftermath, D.A. Henderson was called to Washington to lead a new office charged with emergency preparations in response to bioterror attacks.
Biosecurity, it's not only the chance that you've got a rogue person wanting to use anthrax or plague or smallpox. At the same time, we've got to be ready to deal with any number of agents which Mother Nature might provide us gratis, and we might have a real problem.
In his new book, Smallpox, The Death of a Disease, he chronicles his 50-year career in public health. His work as what he calls a disease detective began at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. In 1967, he was chosen to lead the World Health Organization's campaign against smallpox.
It was a big problem, and we knew we had to work in about 50 countries, and we had about $2.5 million to do that.
Even though smallpox kills 1/3 of its victims, Henderson was optimistic. He had an effective, low-cost vaccine and injector guns, and newly designed needles that could deliver vaccine rapidly. Instead of inoculating every person in every country, he based his strategy on meticulous case reporting. The strategy has been used ever since to combat other infectious diseases.
To have some mechanism, a team, to go out, go to the place where the cases are, see if there are other cases around. You vaccinate them, and you build a kind of a wall around them of people, because smallpox will not exist in animals. It has to go from person to person to person. You can think of a chain, and if you break that chain at any point, smallpox stops.
Henderson relied on people on the ground to follow the trail. Their work was often complicated by rugged terrain and people fleeing floods and armed conflict. The turning point came in India in 1977. Henderson mobilized a surveillance and containment mission among the country's then 700 million people.
But by about the third search, it got better organized, and they decided to go to every house in India. And we soon found that we could go to at least 90% of the houses, because we had a team validating this. 90% of the houses in India in 10 days.
In 1980, WHO declared the world smallpox free. Almost 20 years later, the threat of its reemergence as a biological weapon led Henderson to open the Center for Biosecurity in Baltimore, Maryland.
So the idea of having a community prepared to investigate quickly, to do laboratory studies, and to say it's a new agent, we need to do research and very quickly develop a vaccine or an antiviral drug or what have you. This is very critical as part of our preparation.
In 2002, Henderson was asked to mount a response to a hypothetical smallpox attack. Approximately 75% of the U.S. population would be at risk because vaccination ended in 1972.
We made the decision we needed a lot of vaccine and we needed it quickly, and we were assured by everybody laying out careful charts that it would take 5 years to get 200 million doses of vaccine. And we had it in 18 months.
Looking back at his career, Henderson says what motivated him and his teams in the field was knowing they were saving people's lives. Roseanne Skirble, VOA News, Washington.
Well, we're going to move on now to a guy who, if I had anything to say about it, would get a Presidential Medal of Freedom, Jack Riley, who died recently at the age of 80. Jack Riley was a nice Irish boy from Cleveland, and he did commercials, and he did the voice of Stu Pickles in Rugrats. Robert Altman and Mel Brooks used him in their movies, but hey, Jack Riley is Mr. Carlin, one of the great characters ever on television from the Bob Newhart Show. He's psychologist Bob Hartley's most neurotic patient, who can also be completely self-absorbed and completely obnoxious. Jack Riley played Elliot Carlin with a droll sense of humor perfectly. Here, Mr. Carlin is involved in a paternity suit, and he asks for Bob's help.
Hi, Miss Hartley. Hi, Dr. Hartley.
Oh, Mr. Carlin.
Yeah, we were just reading about you in the paper. I know, so have a lot of people. Hope I'm not interrupting anything, but it's a sort of an emergency.
Emergency, you say?
Not another one. Well, I'll just leave you alone with your patient like I always do when you have an emergency.
What seems to be the problem?
Well, I want you to be honest with me, really late on the line. If somebody asked you how I do with women, what would you say?
Well,
Loser City, right?
no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, you're shy. Sometimes you're somewhat hostile toward women. They tend to make you feel inadequate. You're inhibited. I guess Loser City is pretty good.
Well, I've just been hit with a paternity suit.
Of course, that's only one doctor's opinion.
Mr. Carlin's coming over. He's in a big hurry. He said he can see you for only 5 minutes. Starting now.
What's the matter, Carol? Haven't you ever seen a rich man's knees before?
Leaving on safari, Mr. Carlin.
You know the jokes, Billy. It happens to be Father and Son Day at the Lincoln Park Zoo.
Mr. Carlin, would you come in my office?
Have a good talk with Dr. Hartley, Dad. He's the greatest.
Don't get carried away, Billy.
Sit down, Mr. Carlin.
Oh, no, thanks. That cheap fabric could tickle my thighs.
I guess you came here to talk about Billy.
First of all, I want you to tell me what a great father I am.
Billy seemed to be getting along fine.
Yeah, but his mother's giving me a lot of heat. She wants me to tell him the truth that I'm really not the father.
That makes two of us.
I don't want to.
You got to. I mean, he told me Saturday he trusted you more than anybody else in the world.
Yeah, he does trust me. That's why I don't want to tell him the truth.
Mr. Carlin, the truth never hurt anyone.
Oh, yeah? You're short, you're talking cliches, and your beeper doesn't beep.
All right, it hurts a little. Mr. Carlin, I've been your doctor for a long time, and if I've ever given you a piece of advice that I thought was really important, this is it. You should tell Billy.
Maybe you're right.
Of course, right.
Okay. Good luck.
Wait a minute. I think it's your job to tell him.
I don't want to tell him. Besides, that's what I'm paying you for. I couldn't stand to see the look on his face.
I don't.
Okay. Do a better job than you did with Facts of Life.
Elliot Carlin, one of my favorite television characters. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. And we're going to close tonight with Kenny Baker, who died recently at the age of 81. He was the actor who played R2-D2 in the Star Wars series. Here's Entertainment Tonight on Kenny Baker.
The British actor best known for playing R2-D2 in the Star Wars films has died. Kenny Baker. He stood 3 feet 8 inches tall. He appeared as the beloved robot in 6 Star Wars films and acted as a consultant for the most recent installment, The Force Awakens. He also appeared in other 80s science fiction movies such as Time Bandits and Flash Gordon.
Well, those of you who listen to this program know I'm not a big Star Wars guy, but the theme is great, and how can you go wrong with the close of the composer John Williams leading the Boston Pops? Here it is in tribute to Kenny Baker.